It's 5 o'clock. It's Wednesday, 12th of January, 2022. And we are doing Web Wednesday version 136. And I have the pleasure of having Robby Yung, CEO of Animoca Brands, connecting to us via his virtual world in London. And we'll have you all joining us. I think we've had, it's interesting, I look back and for this event, we've had 320 or so people sign up. The latest event where I had so many people sign up was 12 years ago with a company formerly known as Facebook, who for some reason have decided to rename themselves in your space, Meta. So it's quite a coincidence. 12 years also being the Chinese horoscope, it's the year of the tiger that's coming up. So for some reason, the year of the tiger seems to do a lot when it comes to social media, internet, and get us to change our lifestyles. So I wanted to maybe start on that subject of 12 years ago, or maybe going back a little bit further, because you and I originally met back in 2005 or 6, I believe, Robby, when you were still living in Hong Kong, and you were involved in Yatsu's companies at the time. He had Outblaze, which was building communities around email addresses, around domain names, and had got together with Sanrio to launch Hello Kitty. So he very cleverly transitioned Hello Kitty from a PC game to an online game. So I was there with one of his businesses, Dream Cortex, and we were creating massively multiplayer online role-playing games, or MMO RPG, for the likes of Adidas. So I think that's when we last kind of spent time together, talking, working. So things have really moved on, and that's back in 2006. It'd be very interesting for me to see how a company born out of Hong Kong now has gone from the world of massively multiplayer online games, virtual worlds which existed back in 2006, maybe on servers rather than the cloud, to where we are now. So I thought it'd be really interesting just to start with, Animoca. Every time I turn on my computer and check news, Animoca's up to something new. You're up to something new. There's like an endless amount of acquisitions and things going on. So maybe we could start on the bigger picture and zoom in, because there's so much to cover in this call. So maybe you just explain to us where you're seeing the journey of Animoca as it is now, and all the pieces that you're putting together.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with a long story, just because it'll make me look smarter than I actually am, and then I'll reveal to you how this is all just luck. But I'm gonna give a shout out first to Jonathan, who I noticed just joined, because this story involves him. For any of you who know Jonathan, so. Jonathan actually is the one who introduced me to Yat in Small World Stories about, let's date ourselves, John. This is about 25 years ago almost now.
Long time ago.
And we met because Jonathan had a startup that he was chaperoning at the time. And he said, when I asked him about what it was like, he gave me a book to read. And he gave me the book Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, which many of you may know because he was the one who coined the term metaverse. And so it was after reading that book that, it's kind of like the Bible of people who want to build metaverses. And it really elaborates this whole idea of creating a virtual space online that people can share and interact and socialize and work, and, an alternative online world. And so anyway, Jonathan was shepherding this startup, and I was an angel investor in the startup, and we had big dreams about building a metaverse. And it turned out that we were about 25 years too early with that particular one. But I'm pleased to say.
But you're still around. You're still around. So that's
yes.
If you're grit and gumption.
If you're patient and you persist, then eventually the world comes around to some of these ideas. It's just that some of them were a little bit ahead of their time. So kudos, Jonathan.
That's yours.
So what we've been working on, we started out as a mobile game company a little over about 12, 13 years ago in 2009, at the beginning of the mobile era. And we built free-to-play games, mostly casual games, distributed them to global audiences for many years. And one of the things that arose, I mean, technology is always changing, and we're always trying to stay ahead of the time. And blockchain has been around already for more than a decade, primarily for the purpose of Bitcoin, and then subsequently Ethereum and other types of more programmable cryptocurrencies. And in 2017, there was the so-called ICO summer. So there were many predominantly Ethereum-based or Ethereum-compatible chains and tokens that were launched, raised lots of money, brought lots of new participants, investors, speculators, fans, enthusiasts into the space, and lots of people bought tokens. And amongst those was a small company in Vancouver who created the standard of what we call the NFT, or the non-fungible token. And they did this because they wanted to, they were crypto people, and they saw an opportunity to combine their business of crypto and their passion with gaming, which was something that they, personally were excited about. And they created a game called CryptoKitties, which is, widely considered to be the first blockchain game. And so we were the publishers of CryptoKitties in Greater China. We partnered with them, later invested in their business. And that was kind of our entree into understanding what was possible when you bring together the idea of blockchain technology, which was largely, created for fintech purposes, and entertainment products. And it leads to a wider thesis of the idea that the way blockchain is going to reach a mass user audience around the world, a consumer audience, is largely going to be through entertainment products. Because as we see, wave after wave of technological innovation, whether it's hardware or software, most of the time, mass adoption happens through entertainment. Because, taking this example, blockchain is an incredible technology, but honestly, most users will not, embrace or engage in a new technology for the purpose of a more efficient way to do their online banking or financial transactions. It's not interesting enough for people. But you give them games to play, and you give them fun, you give them video content, etc., and they will start to embrace new technologies. As we see, how many of us actually use our smartphones for the phone part as opposed to the smart part these days. I actually got a phone call from somebody while I was on a Zoom yesterday, and I was actually annoyed that I was getting a phone call, because it's literally been like months since I've gotten a phone call. I'm like, why didn't they schedule this? And that's just where our culture has come. So I think, long story short, over the last 4 years, we have really tried to embrace this intersection of blockchain and games. We've created many games in-house in our studios. Our headquarters is in Hong Kong. We're born and raised in Hong Kong business. We're out in the cyberport if anybody ever wants to come and visit us. And we're, we wave the flag of, as you know, Napoleon, of being the actual literal first tenant, private company tenant. I mean, aside from HSBC
nowadays
CCW.
Sandbox is the kind of place that people do want to work, because you're away from everybody else. So before, when I was there, it's the kind of place nobody wants to work. Even Microsoft had an office there, but they opened a little meeting room in Central because nobody wanted to go out there. But I see nowadays it's probably very beneficial.
Exactly. So I always chuckle when people refer to us as a startup, and I'm like, yep, we're a startup with the same office lease for the last 20 years.
Very nice.
So we're born in Hong Kong, but we have studios all over the world. We're about 650 people now, and we have grown a lot through M&A. So we acquire other studios to expand our capabilities. Different kinds of studios have not only IP and products that they develop on their own, but also their own strengths in terms of different types of game genres that they specialize in, etc. And we also are a very active minority investor in the sector. So we've done over 170 investments across the industry. taking positions in not only other game companies, but ecosystem companies like layer 1, layer 2 blockchains, wallet technologies, all sorts of picks and shovels businesses, because we really strongly believe in this thesis of true digital ownership so property rights, in virtual spaces. And we think that this industry is poised, to be sort of the next generation of the internet, which is, I think, how it's acquired this moniker of Web3 over the last year.
Excellent. Well, you've covered a lot there. I feel it's a bit like what my background and your background. There's a lot going on, right? So I guess my first, there's a lot. At the moment, like anything, we've been in technology a long time. There's a lot of jargon that comes out. There's a lot of explaining the jargon. There's a lot of kind of lipstick on a pig type things that go on where new terms are used to describe old habits and things like that. So I just wanted to, you and I a week ago or so had an interesting kind of philosophical conversation, but I think it'd be good to start maybe, at this level of where the internet is going, right? Because there's a level here that's really, really interesting, and you will have all kinds of effects, whether it's behaviorally, economically, business startups wise, etc. This whole concept of Web3. I was thinking about renaming Web Wednesday Web3 Wednesday, but that might be a bit corny. But and I also have to thank Outblazes. Actually, it was because of that I started Web Wednesday back in 2006. So we all got connections into Outblazes, like the mother of all internet companies in Hong Kong. It's like Cyberport has given birth to, it must be over 500 companies by now. Quite a lot, right? So I just, in terms of the next generation, I don't want to use the term wave because that gets associated with COVID, but the next generation of what is this? If you break down Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, what do you think the implications are? I mean, there's something that's been circulating on the internet of Web 1, 2, and 3, and it was kind of log in with an email, log in with Facebook, and then log in with your digital wallet, right? So that's simplifying it, but maybe I'd like to hear your version of where that is.
So I think Web 1 was largely, Web 1 was, the internet, the birth of the internet. And the idea behind Web 1 was that it was very decentralized. Servers were all over the world. And it was, it was designed by the military so that being decentralized, it was a network that wouldn't fail because there was no single point of failure, which wasn't entirely true because, of course, there's like one building on the west coast of America and one building on the east coast that actually housed the pipe. But apart from that, it was a great idea. But the thing about Web 1 is that it was largely a one-way sort of transactional environment, meaning you're downloading content, you're downloading video, you're downloading images, audio files, text, and so you're consuming on the basis of ubiquitously available and copyable content that is downloadable. Web 2 began to centralize all those things, mainly in order to facilitate ease of use amongst users, because you'll recall in the early days of the web, it was hard to find things. Every website was different. None of them were seemingly connected, and hence the rise of search engines, because you couldn't find anything out there on the internet. And so Web 2 started to consolidate all that around different kinds of social media platforms, streaming platforms, etc., so that they became destinations where the consumption path and the onboarding was as absolutely simple as possible. Once you have an account with any of these services, then everything else is at your fingertips. And so power became very much consolidated amongst a handful of behemoths, YouTube and Spotify and Facebook, etc. And when it comes to the consumption of content, streaming became the de facto methodology because digital rights management has never been done. There's never been a solution that the industry has agreed upon to manage digital content effectively. So in order to protect copyright, streaming has become the de facto method. Because essentially nobody owns the content anymore. You just basically get to enjoy a version of it when you want to listen to it or watch it. And blockchain changes all that. So why we call it Web 3 is because this new generation of the web, underpinned by blockchain, gives us this economic and security layer to the internet that we lacked originally when the web was built. So when you think about all that content that you download, blockchain allows you to secure that content and conduct peer-to-peer transactions, whether it's for economic value or content value, et cetera. So it basically solves the digital rights management puzzle. It allows you to put up a website and sell, audio files, for example, and you can create them as NFTs and, create 10,000 songs, and people can download individual songs. And it's, so from a consumer standpoint, it's, what iTunes attempted to do originally when it was launched. And we can now do that because of blockchain. And that has very wide-reaching implications because it actually reaches into everything that we do on the internet. It reaches into e-government, it reaches into entertainment, banking transactions, et cetera, because basically we've lived for 20 years on the internet on the assumption that everything is infinitely copyable. So therefore content has no value because it's copyable. And that everything is not secure. So we wouldn't actually do real transactions. Our e-commerce layer online is largely kind of abstracted versions of credit cards. But when you think about it, you're kind of 3 layers away from the actual financial transaction because you need all that protection from all the lack of security and fraud that goes on in the internet. But what if you had a way of doing that where you can actually do a transaction securely with somebody who you don't trust from the outset? I can think, Napoleon, that you're a liar and a crook, but we can still swap a Bitcoin with each other securely. And that's an amazing thing because technology has actually solved that problem. So I think what we're doing now in blockchain games is we're evolving an entertainment industry. So gaming has kind of, in the words of Benedict Evans, the analyst, gaming has basically eaten the world. So gaming has eaten all the rest of entertainment and has become much more than just sort of the stereotypical first-person shooter type games. And this is largely because the distribution platform of mobile, because mobile has made us all into a gamer. Everybody on this Zoom has played a game on their mobile phone. So when I ask, hey, everybody raise your hand if you're a gamer, actually everybody's a gamer. It's not just the old stereotype of people with headsets sitting in front of
you just need to go around
the
travel on the MTR in Hong Kong and you don't really see people's eyes anymore, right? Their mouths are already covered and their eyes are looking at their phones. All you get to see are people's foreheads and ball patches. So
exactly.
It's a very, very good point. I mean, you would say it as a gaming company, right? That I guess what's interesting is the idea that, because there's part of it that I think is slightly kind of romantic. If technology people can be romantic, this seems to be where they put their romance. The idea that you can decentralize the internet. So I think the idea that, we started off, I remember, with a very decentralized and all the kind of punks and the people on IRC chat rooms and things saying this is the way to do it, right? And then it got very centralized. And I'm not too sure this concept of decentralization, we've seen governments and all kinds of organizations build their own walled gardens. I think one of the things that I was curious is how is it the gaming industry? It's the gaming industry itself. I remember in the early days, you're basically connecting into a server, right? If you're a gamer, you would choose the server that you'd want to play on. And it's not exactly open. You are dialing or connecting into a server and you're playing with a set bunch of guilds or challengers on that server. So whereas, in terms of the internet now, and in some countries, people start the internet on Facebook, right? Because it's on their mobile phones. It's like the AOL, they just revisited it maybe 10, 15 years later. So the idea of having this open world seems a bit romantic, naive. I can say that because I'm not in my 20s anymore. But I'm just curious, because if you're driving from gaming, even the gaming companies are all pretty walled, right? I mean, Zynga and the other big bots, they're all buying each other up, right? So is this not just creating another generation of conglomerates that just build up these ecosystems that are very closed, and you have your identity and you use your currency within that world, and if you want to go to another world, it's blocked?
No, so that's actually quite contrary to the typical blockchain ethos. The thing about blockchain that has made it, I think, quite successful, or what success it has had in the limited limited time that it's been around as a generally used technology, is because of the fact that it's largely an open source, open platform ecosystem. So as we build applications on blockchains, because they're openly composable assets, this means that basically, the software protocol or application that you create, I can build on top of that application. I can build on top of the NFTs that you create, or token system that you create, and add more services. And so this is really quite fascinating. If you look at, let's go back to a Web 2 example, Facebook. So Facebook became the biggest platform in the world for gaming at one point in time because it was open. And they opened it up and they let developers build on Facebook, and developers built and built, and they built lots of games. And most famously, Zynga, was the biggest player in that space. And as soon as they had, tens of millions of users and it became a huge game platform, then Facebook decided we're going to close the gate, and pull up the drawbridge. And developers could no longer develop on the platform in an open fashion, because Facebook decided that they had accumulated enough users into the walled garden that they were going to wall up the garden now, because they had benefited from that openness and were then going to use those users for themselves. And blockchain is kind of the reverse of that, because there's no moat and there's no wall. And the reason we can all make tremendous progress is because we can build on the innovation of our colleagues and other products. So for example, when I build a game, one of the ways in which we use blockchain is in our games is we tokenize the in-game currency, and we tokenize the assets in the game as NFTs. So all of the characters in the games, I'll give you a simple example. We have a game called F1 Delta Time, which is a Formula One racing game. You buy cars, drivers, you modify your cars with parts to make it go faster, and you race around the track. Those car parts, all the cars are NFTs. And so you can own those cars and parts, assemble them, and you can sell them in the marketplace, or you can bring them outside the game into third-party marketplaces and also exchange and trade them with other users there. We also have an in-game currency called the Rev token, which you can use across multiple games that we've created, featuring different types of motorsports IP, everything from Formula E to MotoGP, etc. So we've created a little motorsports ecosystem here, but it's all completely open, which means that other people can come along and create new goods and services that build on top of what we've created. Other people can create games, for example, that accept the Rev token, which means that all of our customers, users who have the Rev token, will have more products that they can then spend their Rev tokens on. So it encourages other people, other developers, to make games to access that user base.
If I'm sorry to butt in there.
Go for it.
I just realized something, that Zoom has also created a bit of a walled garden. I'm on the 100 participant limit. So there's 200 people who want to join us, but they can't because I have to pay 200 US a month, which I'm sorry, I'm not going to do for this because I'm not charging any of you to join it. So there's going to be 200 other people who are not going to be able to watch this live. So hopefully they can see the video. So I apologize to them. But anyway, you learn as you do it. So sorry, just going back to what you're saying. I mean, it's interesting. I understand that blockchain has come in and, it's basically releasing the control of where these assets are held and what, I guess what clearing houses and all these things that you have to go through. Typically a game, in a way, if you compare it to the financial world, it's almost like a clearing house, right? You have your assets and etc. So I see Nick's put a question there, definitely allowed later. So the question I have is, when you say this idea of interoperability, a lot of people invest in games. I mean, I remember in the early days, if you were playing a game, you didn't have the time, you'd go to eBay and you'd buy, a level up or a certain equipment that somebody had farmed in somewhere like the Philippines, which we can talk about later. So the thing that was interesting was that is this idea that can actually, if you invest a lot of time in building a character or a car, let's say, juicing up your car, are you saying that the openness means that you can actually, the owner of that car can take it and use it in another gaming environment?
Yes. Yeah.
So you're totally transporting the whole, what you've invested.
Absolutely.
Okay,
so interoperability is a big theme. So it's a combination. Interoperability has two different levels. I think the first level is just you actually own the property in your game, meaning that games historically, as you said, have been closed walled gardens, so that when you buy something in a game, there's no way for you to sell it. It's just a one-way transaction. You pay the developer and you invest money over time to upgrade stuff, and all of those assets in the game that you own are essentially locked in the game. And certain games have in-game economies, and they allow you to trade with other players. So Roblox, for example, is a big platform for that. But still, everything must stay inside the walled garden, and the developer creates and enforces all of the rules, and takes relatively heavy fees for enabling all that. Whereas blockchain games are completely open, which means that you can take the items from my game outside and go to OpenSea, for example, which is the biggest NFT exchange, third-party exchange, and you can sell your items to other players there. And we don't mind. It's all about being open. The second level, which you were referring to, is the interoperability of content. So not only can you take that content outside and trade it with other players and monetize it, but you can bring it into other games and use it in other games. Now that interoperability piece is much more complicated to execute. And so we haven't seen that many examples of it yet in the industry because, honestly, our industry the NFT was invented 4 years ago. So we're still at the very beginnings of an industry. But we're seeing more and more examples now of being able to bring content from one game to the other. And I think that's one of those applications that you'll see that people who are sort of traditional game evangelists will be hard pressed to deny, I think, the attraction and allure of being able to bring your content from one game to another, because I think from a gamer's perspective, that's something that they've always thought about, because you invest so much time and money into creating an online identity and a persona, particularly if you're a hardcore gamer playing like MMO games or strategy games where you spend a long time kitting out your armies and customizing your characters and investing your life into this online persona, because with all your friends that you play with online, this is your persona, that orc or the battle axe you carry or the horse you ride or whatever it is part of your identity. And so to be able to bring that from place to place, not just in the one game that you enjoy, but into many games, I think is something that's quite revolutionary.
That's the interesting part of, I think, of this metaverse concept, is the persistent presence, right? I mean, I remember watching a friend's teenage boys playing World of Warcraft, and they spent most of the time screaming and typing to each other, and it was more like a community. There was that, and they were hanging out with each other at the same time. So it's not like the lonely boy in the basement kind of stereotype. But to take that across into other worlds, I think is going to be a challenge, unless I guess it's a company like yours which is buying up all these games. I guess your ultimate goal would be you would make those games interoperable within one ecosystem.
Yes, and I think long term, we as an industry will kind of agree as to different types of standards for interoperability. I think the tricky part is actually not so much the backend technology, but the idea of the soft side of interoperability. Meaning, if I bring a character from one game to another, what is the art style like? Is it compatible? What kind of, if I bring a sword from one game to another, will it have the same power in this game as it does in the other game? So it's that kind of stuff, as opposed to purely just being able to technically import one item.
And I guess it's also the currency, right? Because it seems to me, if you go back to NFT is one form of tokenization of an item, right? It's non-fungible, but every one of these games for many years has had its own dollars, coins, Roblox dollars or Fortnite V-Bucks, whatever, right? They're all games have tended to have some kind of in-game currency.
Yes.
So now they just seem to be connected to a currency that is convertible into exchanges, crypto currencies, right? And then,
yes.
So is this a world where you see all of the big kind of AAA gaming companies that are all going to take advantage of this and convert their in-game currencies into a kind of crypto tradable currency that you would buy and sell, like mana or whatever, on these exchanges? Is that where you see it going? Because it seems to me that there's a certain amount of liquidity that's created.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So what we're creating is we're creating a world that is much more player friendly, because at the end of the day, what we're doing is creating player driven economies, so that the vast majority of the economic value, sort of the GDP of a game, if you will, is for the benefit of the players, as opposed to the traditional model where it's more of a one-way, developer selling something to a player, and that's kind of it. But I think in terms of the migration of traditional game companies into this Web3 model, it will take time, because particularly for the bigger companies, I think the easiest way to look at it is that the king never voted for democracy, because it's really not in his interest. So I think you'll see the very big players continue to persist with their existing business models, only because there's no reason not to. They do very well from those franchises. I think where you'll see the innovation is going to be in the smaller and medium-sized developers, just the same way that we saw mobile. When mobile first started in 2008 and 2009, many traditional game developers were reluctant to embrace mobile. When you think of some of the traditional console developers, some of them have not even made mobile games still to this day. And many of them took 5-7 years, because their view was the platform was not suitable for gaming. They thought, look, I'm used to creating this cinematic console style experience, and you want me to put it on a phone screen? That's crazy. Who would want to play a game on a phone? Well, lots of people. It turns out 6 billion people like to play games on their phones. But they're just different kinds of games. And I think we can now see lots of compelling storytelling happening on the small screen as well as a bigger screen. So I think that, many of those larger players will sit on the sidelines. Some of them have decided to make small investments, I think, to try to understand what's going on in the space. We ourselves have received investment from companies like Ubisoft and Scopely and Square Enix, who want to learn about what's going on to see how this will impact their game building going forward.
So I'm curious now. Let's get a little bit away from the games, because games have always had their own ecosystem, right? And they've always had people. I always found it fascinating being here in Asia that it's also, they've had a currency and an exchange. I remember talking to some of these contact center, BPOs in the Philippines, in Manila or Subic Bay or whatever. And what was fascinating is that people 10, 15 years ago were using games to make an income, right? There were people playing in the Philippines and then selling, these weapons and upgrades on eBay in the US, right? And they've been bought by teenagers or whoever is 40-year-old men in the US, right? Women. So there's already been this kind of habit of using games as a conduit. There was even a case where one of these guys was telling me that people were in Dubai, and domestic helpers based there were, rather than send their money back via Western Union, which would charge them a whack of a fee, they would buy, credits in a game, and then their cousins would pick it up back at home. So the games have always been a kind of an alternative path for earning money and spending money, right?
Yes.
So it seems to me, sorry, I'm still on topic of games. I just realized I've forgotten this element. But
you can't get away. I told you, games.
I know, I can't get away. I can't get away. I'm sorry. But I just really find it fascinating. There's an extended world, right? There's the gamer, and then there's the people who benefit from that, whether the designers, the graphics artists, all that. But then you've got even more kind of spread out around the edges are these cultures. Nowadays they're rebranded as guilds or whatever. In those days it was farming, game farming, whatever. But this is really interesting, right?
Yeah, what you're talking about, though, keep in mind, although it was economic activity, it was largely considered gray market or illegal against the terms of service of those game platforms, because what people were doing, and World of Warcraft is probably the best example, where people were gold farming to generate, to spend their time to generate in-game assets that had monetary value. but they were doing so against the the rules of the game itself, and so therefore faced the potential of being banned or cracked down upon. Whereas what we do in blockchain games is actually we legitimize all of those gray in-game economies that have previously existed, because we understand that there's market demand for that. And I think the funny thing is, when you give people the ownership and the benefits of ownership of their items in games, you realize that it's like a light switch turns on. It's like it's very difficult to explain to somebody the benefits of ownership if they've never owned something before. If you've always rented a flat your entire life, you don't know what it means to own a flat. But then once you own it, you think to yourself, why was I ever renting? That makes no sense, but you can't understand it until you actually own it. And we see the same thing happening with people playing games. They realize that they've spent their whole lives enjoying and having a great time playing games, but essentially getting nothing but their playtime in return, which is not to say that's nothing, but it's a sunk cost for entertainment. Whereas our thesis is, when people are spending money in games, but they can then recoup some of that spend because they're actually investing in those game items, which can be traded later, it's not actually that dissimilar to, when people like you and I, Napoleon, started playing games on Ataris and consoles as kids. You had game cartridges that you used to be able to sell on the secondhand market to somebody else because they had value. Now we can do that with digital items. So when you think about the mentality of being able to get something back out of the game, we believe people are more likely to spend more in the game to begin with, because they know they'll get a certain percentage of it back because they can sell it on the secondhand market.
And how do you think this is going to change? Because I remember when in the early days of games, it was very, it's quite a complex and time-consuming thing. As you pointed out earlier, it was the mobile phone and the casual games that opened it up, right? Suddenly, the audiences went, from the stereotypical 16 to 20-year-old male to,
Yes.
granny playing at a bus stop, or, 25-year-old office lady
Yes.
having lunch, getting bored. So the
Yes.
casual games and the mobile access has changed that. Do you see that being able to, it's still going to take it back to a very intense kind of experience? I mean, to be frank, to get my NFT card and play it on, your Revcar platform is not, your average granny's access to the internet, right? It's quite a complex step. Get a MetaMask account. It takes a few steps, right?
So I can give you a perfect analogy for that. So I remember sitting in the office in Cyberport in 2012, and we were just starting to develop on Android. And so I thought, oh, I've got to get myself an Android phone. I've got to open up a Google Play account and see what Android is about, because we'd only been developing on iPhone before then. And I remember trying to open a Google Play account with my Hong Kong-based American Express card or my HSBC Visa card. And to open a Google Play account was so difficult. I cannot tell you. It took me weeks to get that thing to work. And Google was not a small company in 2012. And so these things take time. I think one of the reasons that we find onboarding to be so incredibly simple on mobile is because we forget that they already have all our information. So think back to the first time that you opened a Google Play account or an iTunes account, and there was actually some headache and some faff, and there was, 5 different steps and checking your ID and remembering passwords and all that stuff. But you've surrendered all that years ago and forgotten about that onboarding process. So now when you open your phone, it's 1 click to download, 2 clicks to purchase, and that's it. So I think with blockchain, you'll find the same thing will happen. So there will be an onboarding process where you have to create a blockchain wallet to hold your assets. But once you do, then it's simply 1 click to connect to any blockchain-based entertainment product.
Got it. Yeah. So it is moving into an easier. I mean, it will move into an easier world, right? So now let's move a little bit. We can now move away from games. I just, what's interesting is, we're in Hong Kong, right? And in Hong Kong, it's driven by real estate, right? And I've been trying to sell, or I've been successfully selling technology to, big companies in Hong Kong for over 20 years, and they don't move fast, right? What I found fascinating is that suddenly there is this understanding or this perception that there is a land beyond the earth and water that we have in Hong Kong, Hong Kong is famous for reclaiming land, right? We just fill in the sea. But suddenly, you've come to the table, as have several other, Decentraland or Superworld or all these other worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because it's not just the gaming community. It seems to have caught the attention of the Adrian Chengs of this world, the developer, real estate developer families who look at this and they go, or investors and go, hey, this is something that makes sense to me, right? I'll lay my stake, I'll claim my stake in this world. And they seem to be doing that. And I know, particularly Animoca has kind of got this mega city concept going in Hong Kong. I don't know if you've got this. Have you got this going in other cities, or is it just I'm aware of the one in Hong Kong? Is it a global thing that you see taking off?
Sure. Well, I think what we're doing and what you're referring to is particularly a project we recently announced, an initiative in our metaverse called the Sandbox. And so I think what we're seeing is, the Sandbox is a three-dimensional virtual space where people can create whatever they like. It's a user-generated content platform. So think of things like Minecraft and Roblox, and you'll get the idea. And we're partnering with all different kinds of entertainment products, property developers, as you said, etc., to create exciting experiences there, because as a kind of a metaverse environment, it's a place where people will hang out. They will hang out there to socialize. They will, and unlike those kind of virtual spaces that have been led by gaming or communication, it actually has the underpinnings of blockchain, which enable you to have commerce there as well, which means that it becomes not just an entertainment and socialization space, but a place for the exchange of value, meaning you can work there. And that opens up, I think that's the difference between a metaverse and just what we've had before, because it actually then becomes a complete world, meaning you can actually not just spend your spare time there, but you can spend your primary time there if you want, because people will be able to seek careers, and be able to earn a living from the time they spend providing whatever services, entertainment, etc., in those environments.
That's what I find interesting, is it's going back to that kind of farming analogy from the Philippines or guilds. What you're saying in effect is it's not only up to white collar workers in this world that before it was all people just mining the machines and the toys, right? You're introducing these other cities that people can go in and create and work in. And I know there was a lot of promise about this, with Second Life, and some people did go in, and the stories of people creating, avatars and selling clothes and styling and building cities. And, even some of I looked at some of the people that signed up for this. By the way, I've opened it up now. So I paid $2,000 so we could have more than 100 people. So there you go. I'm investing. It was real cash. I'm going to get it back somehow through crypto, or maybe ask all of you to donate. But dear old Zoom has now got $2,000 from me. But anyway, the point is, I was just thinking, where do you say that it's a world that people can go and work and create income. I want to earn back my 2,000. So tell me what I can do. How can I come into the Sandbox and earn back some money?
Here's a perfect example. I mean, if you think about how you conduct something like this today on Zoom, there are other opportunities for you to hold an event in an online space, right? So today you could go and do Facebook Live, you could do something on YouTube. And what do those two experiences have in common? Facebook and YouTube make 80–90% of all of the revenue that's generated from those events. And the same thing happens if you do something on Spotify. Everything is for the benefit of the platform as opposed to the creator. Whereas the metaverses that we and everybody in our blockchain industry create are for the benefits of the users, because our idea is not to create, our idea is to create GDP within the environment, for which we levy transaction fees, but the fees are very, very modest compared to centralized platforms. The industry average tends to be 5%, which means we take 5% of the economic activity that happens on a platform we provide in exchange for providing the platform. But 95% of that value is exchanged peer-to-peer. So Napoleon, when you want to put on a live event and everybody here who's on the Zoom wants to participate, you can go into the Sandbox or Decentraland and hold a virtual event with video streaming or people showing up as avatars and meet in this online space. And you can say, okay, well, maybe I'll, make it a gated admission. Maybe everybody who comes to Web Wednesday needs to pay, 5 Hong Kong dollars to show up and accept cryptocurrency, in exchange for that ticket of admission. Or you can make it free, but that's totally up to you because the platform is open and available for you to decide that. And the only thing that we as the provider of the platform say is, okay, well, whatever economic activity is generated, we take our 5%, but otherwise it's your platform and it's free and open for you to do with what you like. And that's very different than what the Web 2 platforms provide.
It's interesting. In a way, you become a bit like a government, I guess. I saw an article about, do these worlds, these new worlds need constitutions, right? Or is that the right word, constitution? Do they need a governing overall law, right? Because like all humans, we have dark sides, right? There will be misbehavior, but I won't go down there for the moment. But I like this idea of creating worlds that people will go in and, there's been a lot of talk about this, especially under COVID. There's been anybody who's been in the event world, or I'm not an event organizer per se, but the community is part of what I do just because I learn and I experience, right? But there's been a lot of talk about going into these, and there's been all kinds of companies creating these virtual arenas, virtual conference rooms, whatever. And the experience is pretty clunky, right? You walk up to this kind of rather goofy booth, and I think what's missing from it is the gaming element, right? Because it removes any of the shine and the personality of talking to a real human being. I'm talking the business environment, right?
Yes.
Business is pretty dry anyway, until you get to my ripe old age, by which time you realize it's all about cracking jokes and getting to know people rather than dry PowerPoint presentations. But I'm just curious, do you see this kind of adoption of the world that we live in and of all the things that we do moving quite easily into a virtual space? For example, Ronan is saying to me, where's my NFT gin and tonic? And I wish I could just go click and a gin and tonic would appear in Bangkok now, brought to him by some delectable friend. But we're not at that stage, right? So I'm just curious, how much of this is fluff and bubbles, and how much of it's I'd like to hear some stories of things that are really happening that are, people building businesses rather than the big Adrian Chains of this world who, he can sit at home and play games for the rest of his life and he's got enough money to build metaverses all over the planet.
Sure. Well, I think the most important sort of underlying theme to all of this is openness. So the reason that people can build businesses is because, as I said, there is this economic underpinning that blockchain provides. And so maybe I'll go back to my example of F1 Delta time and racing cars. So if you own a Formula One car in our game, you can take that Formula One car to a protocol called Niftify, and you can pledge that car as an asset in exchange for a loan, which you can then use in DeFi to go and trade cryptocurrency and invest in other things. So you can pledge it as collateral for a loan. And that's a really interesting idea because that actually recognizes that, they have decided that there is asset value, there is market value in that NFT that was created for the purposes of our game. And the best part of this story is not, in my opinion, that there's asset value, but that they could create that service without having to work with us. They didn't have to ask our permission to use our asset because our assets are open and freely composable. So they can build that service on top of all our assets. If they decided, okay, we're going to accept any Animoca Brands NFT assets from any of your games in exchange, so all your customers can come and get loans from our service, they're free to do so. And it's because of the innovation that will occur as a result of that openness that we find incredible network effects. So every time that a new blockchain business connects into the greater ecosystem of blockchain businesses, we find network effects because the products are able to talk to each other, and they're not walled garden products. So they all benefit from the commerce and the user activity that happens between each other.
That's really fascinating to me, because I think, you know, why I made the comparison to Facebook 12 years ago is when Facebook, you know, grew, I was tracking the growth of Facebook. It started off, I had an Excel spreadsheet, would you believe it? And every week I would count how many people had signed up. Facebook would share this information in the good old open days. And it had 25,000 people in Hong Kong. And suddenly it went up to 70. And it suddenly went up to, you know, grew. So I think the network effects, I think what I'm seeing is that there's a network, but also the incentive layer. What you're telling me is that there's an incentive layer now, right? Before the incentive for us to get involved is play a game to have fun, spend some time, hang out with friends, maybe earn some points. If you're a farmer, you know, play it because you can pay for your family's food and housing and stuff, or whatever. So there's an incentive layer. And the advertisers, the media industry came in because that's where people were, and you'd have in-game advertising, right? Now it seems like many people are coming to the table. This is the bit that fascinates me, is it's all, so you must be people knocking on your door, which is like why I really appreciate you being on this call, but there must be people knocking on your door every day saying, can I advertise? Can I buy a piece of land? Can I, you know,
Yes.
I mean, right? I mean, everybody is,
Yeah.
anybody who sells anything, which is basically every human being has got some kind of product, seems to be looking at ways to adopt this into the virtual world.
Yes,
right?
And I think the reason that they want to do that is also because the peer-to-peer aspect of it makes it so accessible to the widest possible audience. So, you know, you asked me earlier for sort of real-world examples of how this is being used, and I'm going to go back to gaming just because I have more gaming examples than anything else. But if you think about what it means to be an esports athlete, so esports has been around for a while, particularly popular in Asia, and esports athletes are professional game players. And why are they professional? They're professional because they earn a living from it. But the way they earn their living through playing games is actually from sponsorship, which means that in order to make that living, they need to have an agent, they need to be introduced to sponsors, they need to probably live in a city where they can actually meet those people in person and create those deals. And so there's a whole infrastructure around being that professional athlete, which is not dissimilar to being a professional, you know, basketball player or a football player. But with blockchain games, being an esports athlete is a completely different concept. So if you come to our, you know, F1 Delta Time game and you can race around the track faster than anybody else on a weekly basis, if you're on the top of the leaderboards, we have prize money for all of the top players. And that prize money on a weekly basis is probably anywhere from 10 to 15,000 US dollars equivalent. And so as a player, if you're the fastest around the track, that's it. At the end of the week, boom, $10,000 in your wallet and you've won. And you don't need any middlemen. You don't need a bank account. You can just be, you know, an adult or a kid or wherever, sitting in your living room with an internet connection. So you don't have to have access to all that infrastructure of the rest of the world. All you need is a blockchain wallet and an internet connection. And so that actually levels the playing field of who can become an esports athlete in that case, because the accessibility is so ubiquitous.
That's really interesting. And where do you think this could go wrong? Or, I mean, you know, we're humans, right? We're not exactly the world's best gift to the planet. We have lots of faults. And I mean, I know that, you know, there's constant hacks, which, you know, I think you guys just experienced one, but there's, you know, there's constant hacks out there, right? So there's a security element in terms of hacks, right? And if people are investing so much of their personal time and, you know, their own characters and personalities into this, where do you see, please, by the way, keep putting these questions there. I'll let you ask them later, but where do you see things going wrong? What is the industry doing to do that? Because if you look at Facebook and the like, you know, there's been a lot of issues about what Instagram does to, you know, teenage girls and their health. Where could this go wrong? And is the industry preparing and, you know, skilling up for it?
So I think the way we look at it from our perspective is what we're creating are places in the virtual world that are largely based on concepts that we have from the physical world. So the business models that we create, the economic models, you were referring before to Adrian Cheng investing in land in the Sandbox, because in a virtual real estate context, there's a place for virtual real estate developers, because what they're doing is buying virtual real estate, enhancing the real estate and selling it for a premium to make a profit. So the business model is actually identical to what they do in the physical world, just being enabled by technology that allows them to do it with digital asset ownership in the digital world. I think there will always be unintended consequences. Most of the malfeasance that we see in this sector in terms of hacking tends to be, unfortunately, targeted at the least secure aspect of the technology, which are the people who use it. So the human manipulation for getting passwords and pieces of ID tends to still be, people asking you to click on something and people just click on it, tends to still be the primary gateway to that kind of activity. There are solutions that people are trying to develop to help prevent us from, falling susceptible to those kinds of scams. And I think, nothing is perfect, but we're doing our best.
And one of the things that I'm really curious about too is the fact about digital ID, or you mentioned property, right? There's the ownership of something, but digital ID. When you look at all these movies, it's all about jumping in. You've got an alternative ego that also seems to be affected in the real world, whether it's the Matrix or whatever, Ready Player One, and you have this kind of, your ID goes beyond just a kind of pixel. It's got some flesh and some interaction there. Do you see people using this as a fantasy world in a way? Or, it seems like it will divide between the game players who prefer not to necessarily be themselves, and the people who go there with a business intent, right? If you're going to go and be Samsung and set up your own virtual world in Superworld or Decentraland or this, I'm sure Samsung has something on Sandbox. But they're going in and they don't seem to be being that imaginative, right? They're creating these virtual shops, but then what they're doing that's creative is they're using the multimedia elements of it. They're doing like concerts and they're doing live bands or stuff like that. Do you, so there's an identity, like a corporates are transferring their brand identities. Do you see individuals doing that as well, or are people going to prefer to stay in their own? I think
the reason you see corporates coming in is because honestly, I think that's a great sign, because it shows a slight level of maturity in terms of user acceptance of the platforms. I think what they're doing is essentially following their audience and their market. So if their consumers are spending time in a given space, then brands want to be there in order to cater to those consumers and to get mind share. I think the exciting thing for them too is that because blockchain fundamentally provides a commerce, a secure commerce layer under the internet, it's not, beyond the realm of thinking that this will be the medium through which they conduct most of their e-commerce going forward, because the enabling of transactions is much more straightforward. I think to go back to your question of how people identify themselves, that you'll, I think, continue to have a variety of different ways. Like, for example, my Twitter profile is an actual photograph of myself, right? But Twitter profiles are a wide range of things to all kinds of people.
But your name is like, find me in Hong Kong, or what is it, Hong Kong? Your handle.
View from Hong Kong, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it dates when I first started to use Twitter, because Twitter was about just having an opinion at that time, and that was pretty much all it was about. Sorry,
carry on.
So I was going to say, so I think people are going to use it in whatever ways, is comfortable for them. And so I think, like me being a middle-aged guy, I'm probably going to largely be myself in those online spaces. But perhaps younger generations or people who identify with certain, their favorite characters from anime or what have you, may want to be avatars or reflect their fandom in the ways that they appear in online spaces.
Yeah, very interesting. So what I might do now is just open, I see a few questions that come in. So what I'd like to do, and I'll kind of add to them, is get the people who ask the questions in the chat to, so if I call out your name, maybe you could turn on your video, well, if you've got your video on, keep it on and unmute, and you can ask Robby yourself. So let's go, let me see. Who have we got here? First question from Eddie Lee. Are you still there, Eddie? Eddie, don't go away, come back to us. Are you still there, Eddie? He might have gone. It's quite a technical question, so maybe we'll see if he comes back to that later, because it's very technical. How about one from Rohanak? Are you there, Rohanak?
Hey, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Could you ask your question, please?
Sure. So I was just listening and I was thinking, with the legitimization of all these buying and selling of assets on kind of a secondary market, and there is significant amount of value and volume in this trade and transaction, right? I'm wondering how something like a government would approach this. Would they be individually taxing these transactions for the users or the platforms themselves? This also comes with the backdrop of the Singapore government announcing some kind of a warning to investors, retail investors investing in Web3 and metaverse assets.
Yeah, so I think what will happen is this. What we've seen so far is that this will largely be the responsibility of individuals for the time being to self-report. So, in many jurisdictions, we've seen if you're trading cryptocurrencies or you're buying and selling digital assets, digital land or property, where you make a profit, that profit may be subject to some type of profits tax. And so therefore, it's the responsibility of the individual who generates the profit to then report that on their own taxes. So it's, I think at the moment, based on the honor system, but my understanding of jurisdictions like the UK here where I live now, it's required to be self-reported.
Yeah, you've got to be risky. It's slightly risky there because you're almost following the footsteps of Facebook. It says, content, nothing to do with me. I'm just a platform, right? So it's a dangerous territory, right, to get into. I mean, one of the things that I find fascinating about blockchain is ultimately trackable, right? I think it's all public. It's all public. Once you know the address, it's trackable. Yeah, people can jump hoops through different addresses and things like that, but I think you guys recently bought a company that tracks this, right? You track it. You have.
And I think one of the things that we do is we try to help people facilitate, and I think you will see this in all kinds of blockchain games further on down the road, is you'll see inbuilt software that helps users to basically track all of their transactions for reporting purposes so that you can download, an Excel file of all your transactions, because we have to make it easy for customers to report their taxes. And honestly, I think that's something that it's a distraction to discuss because that's a good problem to have. The reason we didn't have this problem before is because nobody actually made any money.
Yeah, it's interesting because Hong Kong, we're on the border of, China, Greater China, and whenever a new technology comes up that has anything to do with transferring money, it seems to be used and abused. So I heard, ICOs were like a great way to get money out of China. It seems like NFTs are the next vehicle. So there's a whole underbelly of things going on. I'm not saying in your environment, by the way. I'm just saying that it's known in Hong Kong, and I think it's one of the reasons a lot of the finance crew are getting into it, is that there's a lot of investment vehicles being, because it's connected to a physical good in some cases, right? Whether it's the British Museum or artists connecting it to, I've seen a group here doing it, connected to bottles of wine, right? There's a physical, very tangible good connected to a digital asset, which I think makes it much more easy for people to understand. Okay, let's move on to the next question. we had a question about gin and tonics, virtual NFT gin and tonics, but I think Ronan's going to have to sort that one out. He's based in Bangkok. Unless you've got another question, Ronan. Are you there? No, Ronan is a master of the mobile world. He might come back to us, or he's gone off for a real gin and tonic. One from Barry. Barry, are you there? Would you like to ask a question? Baza, come back.
Yep. Yeah, I'm here. Hi. Barry from Shanghai here. I was just wondering, as an agency guy and advising clients and brands at the moment in the B2B space, and it's back to monetizing everything. How can I work out how to make money both from my clients and from my agency from this whole 3.0 metaverse NFT thing?
I think there are two ways you can look at it. I think on the one hand, for the clients, there are opportunities for the opportunities are very much, as I said, evocative of what happens in the physical world. So there are pure branding opportunities for identifying yourself as a brand as being forward-looking and sort of thinking about where technology is headed by participating in the technology. So the example that Napoleon gave earlier of Samsung building a virtual store within Decentraland, being the first one to do that kind of positions the brand identity in a certain way, saying that Samsung is forward-looking and embracing this new market, which is largely populated by a younger demographic, and I think that positions them in terms of their image. On the second part would be more traditional advertising, because one of the things that the metaverse provides you with is essentially a lot more quote unquote outdoor space. So all of these metaverses, there's no reason that they're not going to have billboard spaces and, the sort of science fiction style, Tokyo of 2152, laden with billboards environments, because you're going to have all different kinds of metaverse spaces with advertising opportunities where there are consumers present, and anywhere you have millions of people spending time, I think advertisers are going to want to get in front of them, and so there are all kinds of new formats that will be available in these spaces that you can advise your clients on.
I also think, Baza, you're an old hand at this, right? There's a lot of content there that can be played with, right? The world of the internet has moved into this kind of content marketing thing, and social media has got frankly drowned with content, most of it bollocks. Well,
here's my question as an extension to that question, because I know there's some quite young creatives on the call here today, so they're looking for inspiration. And as Napoleon just said, content very heavily driven by text and video on the social, on the phone. If we're looking to embrace the opportunities for metaverse and NFTs and stuff as a young creative looking to develop their career as a 23-year-old, what sort of skill sets should they be looking to develop?
So I think in terms of content, you can think of it in several different ways. There's going to be persistent content, which is, I'm building my Samsung retail shop in the metaverse, and there are going to be outdoor billboards, and that's going to be there, on a quasi-permanent basis for all passers-by. And then there are going to be content experiences. So, like in our Sandbox virtual world, people can create their own games and interactive experiences. So there's no reason that you can't create Samsung theme parks or a Samsung game experience where people want to go to a branded experience as part of their entertainment, content. So I think that for young creatives, the exciting part is kind of thinking out of the box with this new tool set, which is largely open and available to them. What would I do if I could create pretty much anything? Because I'm no longer subject to the constraints of, fitting into the news feed of Facebook or fitting into the streaming, sort of linear channel of YouTube, for example.
Let's take another question in that vein from Lawrence. Lawrence, see there, Lawrence Lowe is kind of connected to brands, etc. You had a question.
Yeah. Hey guys, thanks.
Hey Lawrence, good to see you.
Yeah, long time. So Robby, my question was really kind of some high-profile brands that got into the metaverse recently, who are direct competitors. So Adidas and Nike. They obviously had two different approaches towards this. And my question is, what do you think about their approaches and who's winning?
I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think that's the best part, because I think that when I look at what they're doing, it's very much the idea of when we see, KFC open a shop on the same block as a McDonald's, because they actually bring more fast food traffic to the same block. So there's actually a logic in it as opposed to them competing for customers. I think Nike's acquisition of Artifact is very interesting because it shows that they're taking the sector quite seriously. And most importantly, what they're doing is they're acquiring a talented creative team that is really entrenched in the medium. So I think that now they have an in-house team that can really guide a lot of the innovation going on there. I think the other thing that's exciting if you're a physical product company brand is the idea of not just participating in the metaverse, but thinking about how you blend both an online and an offline experience together. So how you enable, the consumer who buys that pair of, Nike trainers or Adidas trainers in the physical world to have an online version of those. Maybe there's a premium, maybe you pay an extra 100 Hong Kong dollars for a pair of trainers that comes with an NFT version of them. So one of the things that's already been happening for some time is, as you know, trainers are a popular collectible item amongst certain kinds
there's a
of
marketplace,
collectors.
right? The sneaker marketplace. What's the sneaker? The famous,
Yes.
My son was on it trying to trade sneakers without, you're not even buying them, right? You're just trading the brand.
Exactly. And so what you do now is you can essentially create NFTs based upon the individual ones you own. And so when you want to go and trade them as collectibles, you're actually just trading the NFTs. And the idea is that you actually then have the physical storage. And this is, again, goes back to what you were saying about wine, why wine is another great commodity for this. So the idea is when you buy and sell wine, not everybody wants to drink it right away. And so it makes sense to keep it in a physical warehouse and essentially just trade the ownership of the wine back and forth. And that's what NFTs enable you to do.
I think also Adrian Toy is on the line there. He's corrective. It's called StockX. So obviously Adrian Toy used to work for Puma, now works for Google. He knows all about trading virtual sneakers. But I think that's fascinating. Is that there's a world of people where the virtual, the terminology we use is still a bit old and fuddy-duddy, right? There's virtual, analog, digital. I find it's all going to disappear. It's like a marketer, right? Barry was always criticizing the digital crew for going digital when it's just direct marketing and it's marketing. In effect, it's engaging people, right? So I think we're still learning to come to terms with all of this language. But I guess, going back to Barry's comment, isn't it all about, you just said Nike and acquiring Artifact. It's a bit like when social media first came along, what companies and agencies, and sorry to talk about the business side, but the business side of this didn't understand was what were the skill sets that you need in order to engage people via Facebook, via Twitter, via LinkedIn, via Weibo, via Weixin, whatever, right? And then it became, now what you're saying is, again, it's what can I do? What can I actually do in these worlds, right? What freedom do I have to express myself and engage? And then what resources? Because I presume, like all worlds, you're going to need designers. I mean, I remember going back to the old gaming days with Yak, there were people who just did the illustration. Then that gets moved down the line, and there's somebody who builds a framework of a 3D figure. Then there's somebody who skins it and gives it, movement, an animator. And, that's a factory line to get a product to go into your worlds. Now, I'm on your mailing list, and I noticed that the world we live in now is slightly different because a lot of those services are provided by the platforms themselves. So, for example, on Sandbox, I got an email just before this call actually saying we just launched an NFT, create your own, NFTs, characters, etc. So even someone like me who's not, that design savvy can go in and create it. So I guess the question is, are the tools there for creative tribes, for agencies to go in and create content on behalf of their clients?
Yeah, there are definitely. And Sandbox is exceptional in that it's supposed to be a user-generated content platform, which is why it has a pixelated art style. It's very simple to create things because the idea is that anybody can make something. Whereas other metaverses require, professionals to do so. I think this is one reason why the metaverse is largely being created by game companies. And it's because historically game companies have had the design and the combination of graphic design and technology capabilities in-house to develop the most sophisticated virtual spaces. Because gaming has been at the cutting edge of, using fancy graphics and processing power, et cetera, for many years. So always in terms of pushing the envelope of the type of quality that's able to be created for content. So that's why I think these kind of teams lend themselves to creating metaverse content.
Excellent. And so going to, there's another phase there where we're talking about, I've got a question here from Bobak, and I'd like Bobak to ask this question because it's very much the human interface of what's happening here. So, Mark Zuckerberg did an okay job of pushing this kind of, masked up Oculus version of the world that we're moving into. Maybe Bobak, if you're there, could you ask your question?
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. I'll turn on my video here. It kind of looks like I'm recording a TikTok video, but bear with me. Robby, thanks so much. Really enjoyed your remarks. My question is about augmented reality. It's about that interface layer. So mobile games, obviously it's in the name. It didn't become a thing until there was mobile, right? And really iPhone can be credited with that. So I'm wondering, will Web3, in your opinion, become truly mass market, become accessible, experienced, and available to human beings all over the planet without that experience layer, without that hardware, and specifically augmented reality?
So yes, because I think the thing about the metaverse is that it's an idea of having a shared virtual space. And so the way people experience that space through different kinds of devices will be different. And there will be different layers and levels of experience. Some people will want to go the full hog, Oculus style VR experience. Other people will interact with it on their mobile devices in a light fashion. Some people will have augmented reality, and it will kind of depend on what it is that you're wanting to do at the time. When you just want to check what the prices of your cryptocurrencies are in your trading portfolio, that just requires a quick mobile nod. Whereas if you're going to sit down and have a long conversation with somebody, you may want to be in front of a desktop screen. Or if you want to browse a virtual art gallery, you may decide that VR is a more appropriate kind of medium for that. But they're all connecting into the same metaverse. So the sort of last mile of that to the customer, if you will just depend on what kind of experience they want to consume at the time.
I think that it's interesting because Bobak he's an entrepreneurial fellow, and he's creating, glasses that basically enable you to bring AR into our world, right? So there's, and I think you made a good point, which is this immersive field, and the level of requirement to do that, right, is how much do you immerse yourself? I mean, I had a go with your Revcar thing, and I tried to do it on my keyboard, and it was really clunky. I think there's a whole bunch of hardware that comes off the back of it. If I had a joystick or a steering wheel, I think it'd be a lot better, right? So it seems to me there's this kind of connection from the digital into the physical is going to still require a whole gamut of hardware, which is why I think Apple is about to coin it with some yet another gadget they're going to come out with. Professor Galloway says that they're going to put cameras into the bottom of these AirPods. So not only will I be hearing myself in this, I mean, all our senses, right? The sense of sight, sense of smell, and hearing, oral, is also very, kind of cutting off, puts you in your own little world. All right, let's take some more questions. I see there's one here from Nick Brennan says, I have a question, but he didn't say what it is. So Nick, if you've got a question, fire away.
Hi, I'm Nick from Digitas in Shanghai. We had a meeting recently with Unit 9, who are doing a lot of content development. They're a partner of ours for the metaverse, and for not really metaverse, but gaming, concerts in game, car dealerships in games. He drew a very fine line between gaming and metaverse, because Roblox, and you got Fortnite, you have things, events, Nike Land that my daughter plays in, and these sorts of things. They're not really metaverse. So the question I have is more about the definition of the metaverse and which one's going to win, who's going to win. You know, we all went on Facebook years and years ago because, not for Facebook, we went on it because our friends were in there. If I go wandering around Decentraland again tonight, you know, I won't see any of my mates because most of them don't even know what it means yet. But you know, it's the same thing with Sandbox. You want to go there, Facebook may end up owning this whole space. You know, do you see that happening, or China having their own WeChat version, and you know, because it's locked out, or do you see a bunch of different metaverse malls, as it were, each with their own activities and brands and, you know, selling space? Do you see a bunch of malls, or do you see one huge winner in this whole game?
Okay. So I don't see one huge winner. And I think that there's in fact a very, very strong cohesive industry movement that kind of pits Facebook on one side and the rest of the world on the other side of that equation, because I don't think anybody's quite pleased with how Facebook has turned out, at least unless you work for Facebook. But I think the distinction that your colleagues were making is between gaming and metaverse is essentially between closed gaming or traditional gaming and metaverse, because metaverse implies openness and interoperability and compatibility. And I think that things like Decentraland and the Sandbox are examples of metaverses, but I think that there will be many of them. And so to make a physical world analogy, we think of metaverses being like the world, and we hope that Sandbox is maybe like New York City or Hong Kong. It's hopefully a leading place where there's more economic activity and more exciting stuff going on than others, but it's still one of many, and they will all have their own characteristics. Don't forget, all of these early metaverses now are largely English language destinations. We don't yet have, you know, Tagalog metaverses and Bahasa metaverses, etc. But that will come. So there will be many,
isn't that
many
happening
metaverses.
in China with Baidu and Tencent and all those guys? I mean, I've seen some amazing, amazing graphics and videos of these. You know,
Correct.
China has been in the online gaming business. I mean, that's how Tencent became rich, right? And NetEase and all these guys. They have been cracking games, online games, for over 20 years. I mean, surely there's happening in parallel.
So the exception to my answer, of course, will be China. And I think that China will largely follow the Web 1 model and Web 2 model that China has followed. So I think there will be you know, a handful of Chinese blockchain providers, layer 1 blockchains, and metaverses that will build on those blockchains. And so those systems will probably largely be open, but within China, and there will be a little bit of a gated moat to the outside, as there is with the current internet. Is my guess.
Cool.
Well, I heard a really good quote from a journalist from I think eMarketeer or whatever, one of the digital podcasts I was listening to, saying that basically the metaverse, he was being a bit pedantic, is a unification of all these separate kind of worlds coming together, right? Which is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's like the internet. Yeah, exactly.
But it needs the ability to jump, like a browser allows you to jump from web page to web page, right? And now we're at the AOL moment, right? Where you've got your own little walled garden and you can only kind of pay, and you've got to break out of that and have a browser that allows you to go from game to game or world to world. So I assume there will be some kind of browsing interface, whether it's you know, what I've been seeing on Black Mirror, which is terrifying, which is like, you know, little lenses on your skin, on your eyes that take you into different worlds, or whatever. But there seems to be some kind of interface. Do you see the interface being a particular piece of hardware, or are we just playing around trying to find?
I think we've learned that it's got to be mobile first in order for it to be as ubiquitous as possible. But in the near term, it will tend to be PC based. Or browser based, only because the browser has the most ubiquitous platform compatibility. Mobile is still subject to the requirements of Apple and Google specifically. So until they're more clear on how they want to deal with blockchain based content, we're going to be restricted, I think, to the browser as being the most flexible platform.
Interesting. We have Chris Lauro in the US who's awake, and it must be like 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever it is there. Chris, he has a question. Chris, thanks for staying up. I hope you've got a gin and tonic or a coffee or something in your hand.
Didn't quite stay up, but I kind of woke up for this, but It's a bit early here in New York, but thank you very much, Napoleon. I had a quick question. As a core member and metaverse lead of a collectible, will Animoca Brands, we look at many of the collectibles these days are looking to be more than just a picture in cyberspace. And we see that with, I know the Sandbox, you know, you do create games. I didn't get an alpha pass, so I couldn't quite work on my property there. But do you see Animoca potentially working with cross-chain development, avatars with AI, and making experiences for other collectibles and trying to make the metaverse a bit more than it is today? It's kind of lonely in Decentraland.
Yes.
Sandbox.
So interoperability is absolutely critical, and that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of different, in-house studios and in-house products. And one of the reasons that honestly we started our, minority investing activities is because we wanted to be able to influence talking to other companies and encouraging them to make their products interoperable with ours. So yes, these are all works in progress, but I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that, honestly, nobody in the mainstream had even heard of an NFT a year ago. And so it's still very early days, and these products do take time to make. And the interoperability piece is difficult because we largely are making up the standards as we go right now as an industry. So I think, we don't want, it's unfair to judge us yet by the products you see now, because we're, as I like to give people this mobile analogy, we're still in the pre-Angry Birds days. If you remember what mobile games were like before Angry Birds, and that's where blockchain gaming is right now. So I think, in a couple, give us another year or two, and then you can be a lot more picky about how you judge the products.
Oh no, so, I'm fully. I love the product. I'm very much involved in. We're in like 7 different worlds at the moment.
Fantastic.
But we're working on it. We are the 7th. Just a quick plug. But anyway, I thank you very much for your time. I appreciate
no
that.
problem.
It's been very
appreciate you getting up early, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. So talking about time, Robby, it's you said you've got to kick off in 4 minutes. You'll have to leave us. So I guess I have 1 or 2 more questions, unless anybody there has a question. I know a few people had questions, but then they left. There's Fabrizio. Do you want to ask yours? It's rather specific to the real estate industry, but maybe quickly ask it because it's very relevant to a certain investment community here in Hong Kong.
Hello, this is Fabrizio from Hong Kong, quarantine, but getting close to be free. So thank you, Napoleon, for the investment. Definitely, we're going to join you again. You can charge, very interesting. Thank you, Robby, for your time. So I regularly invest in UK properties, and I can see actually the NFTs, they can really actually, they have the potential to totally disrupt the entire real estate world. And let's say when I get a mortgage in the UK, for example, is really a nightmare. The amount of document for AML, etc., is really huge. So how do you see the NFT entering into this world? Do you think this government, they're gonna acquire that? And then if possible, if there is time, I noticed that the gas fee are extremely expensive. What do you see in the future for that? Because it is also related to the
no problem. I'll give you two quick answers. One, on gas fees, don't worry about gas fees. It's largely an Ethereum version 1 problem, which is going to go away shortly. And there are many alternatives to that as well. On the first part, blockchain is fantastic for property title deed transactions and e-government. So it makes perfect sense that property deeds should be put on the blockchain. They're public records, so it's naturally compatible. And the effect that will have, I don't think that it will necessarily cut down KYC AML, because that's very important and that has to be done in some manner. But I think what it will do is it will cut a lot of the expensive middlemen. When you think of transfer deed like title companies and doing all those title searches and all the lawyering and etc., all those layers of fees in executing the transaction, I think will change, because exchanging a property deed will become exactly the same as you know, sending a Bitcoin from one person to another. So basically a quasi feeless transaction.
So I want to ask you one last question. As you mentioned, it's very English based. How do you see the rest of the world? I mean, you mentioned earlier, I think when we spoke last year about last week, sorry, financial inclusion. How do you see, you know, the wider world? Are the pockets of, you know, activity coming from Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia? What, you know, we're all very centric in our developed little cities, but what do you see happening?
So I think the exciting thing is this is still largely an English-centric medium, only because that, you know, it's the most popular common language across the world. But I think one of the things that we see in Web3 is that if you look at the leaders and pioneers in the field, it's far more diverse than any technology revolution before. If you look at the leading companies in this space, actually very few of them are based in Silicon Valley. So unlike Web 1 and Web 2, this is not an American invented creation. And in fact, we see a tremendous amount of innovation from companies everywhere from North Asia to Southeast Asia to Russia and Central Europe. Huge innovation there. I mean, as I think I mentioned to you, Napoleon, this is the first time that I attend conferences and meet African technology entrepreneurs, which is a constituency that has largely been absent from previous tech revolutions that I've been a part of. So I think that's really, really exciting.
Excellent. Well, it's 6:30 and you've been graceful enough to give us an hour and a half of your time in the real world. If we want to find you in the virtual world, how do we find you? Where can I chase you down and have a virtual gin and tonic with you and Ronan? Where do we find you?
The best place is probably, well, there's obviously LinkedIn, which is ubiquitous, but Twitter, for anybody who's been involved in crypto Twitter, it's the most passionate form of Twitter. So come get engaged in the community.
So Twitter, maybe give us the names of the Twitter accounts that people should be
sure following. It's at just you can I'm at View from HK, but also if you just go to Animoca Brands and follow Animoca Brands, you'll get linked through to lots of other things that we do and companies that we work with.
Okay, well, thank you again. For those of you who've joined, you will receive, if you've shared your MetaMask wallet address, Robby, immediately after this, no, I'm sure, over the next week or so, his team will be sending you your very first NFT racing car. So for you to experience it yourself. So thank you for doing that, Robby. And as you did say, we can use it as collateral. So I'm looking forward to buying my next apartment off the back of this NFT. I really appreciate it and keep on doing great work. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Cheerio.